Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Siri Scanlon of Mumford Advisory and Pat Condo of Seeker Technologies.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking with us for this last session of the first day of Concordia Summit Miami. I'm thrilled to be here with Pat Condo, CEO of Seeker Technologies. Pat has an extensive and esteemed career in search, and I'm excited for everyone to get to know a bit more about what Seeker is working on. They are working to fight, very simply, misinformation and disinformation by giving the consumer really the tools and the framework to make an educated decision on what they are consuming in media content online. So I think it would be, really excellent to understand, just from your words, how Seeker works to tackle this problem.
Yes, so thank you, Siri. Of course. The way we look at it is that when over 50% of the Democratic population doesn't believe in the news, they don't trust their government, they don't trust their health organizations, something's wrong. And so we started to look into the picture of what is creating this particular challenge over the last 6 years, and it's only accelerated. And what we discovered, of course, is what everyone in this room knows, is that there's an influx of false and misleading information flooding all of our ecosystems. And it comes from really state actors that represent, say, 66% of the world that are not democratic. They come from domestic actors that want to create different points of view, different kinds of chaos, different kinds of results. And the net result is that the web that we are all on, that we trusted, has begun to fracture. And so the interest that Seeker has is that we believe that, like anything that you do today, a rating system could help ameliorate that problem. There are rating systems for everything. There are rating systems for movies, for wine, for automobiles, for mortgages, for credit. The largest sources of information in the world, there are no rating systems. And you have to ask yourself, why is that? And it's very simple. It's number one, every transaction that's done, every microtransaction, somebody in this room pays for it. And number two, cognitive bias. They have figured out how to marry these two things together and drive your attention, drive your interest, and continue to drive you through what I would call supercharging the payload, which is today the anger emotion. And that's what's been taking place over the last 6 years. And so what Seeker has been set up to do is to create a rating system that looks across all the content that comes in on the web, starting with news, moving to video platforms, image platforms, podcasts, and now ultimately synthetic content, which is be created by these new generative AI platforms.
So, and Seeker uses AI and machine learning to essentially provide an objective view of news media content via two means: the credibility score and political lean. And what I think is so fascinating is you're not seeking to tell someone this is true or false. It is to inform someone that a piece of content falls on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of credibility based on a number of inputs. Yeah. So that individual can then make the decision themselves on whether they choose to consume that information or not.
So yes, and I liken it to the very early stages of 10 or 12 years ago, when the internet was flooded with phishing schemes, ransomware, stalking schemes, cyberbullying, and we have companies that produce virus software, and it says, hey, I've detected the presence of this kind of content. You can click it if you want, or you can prevent it, but I'm not going to tell you not to click it. And eventually, over time, people said, I'm not going to click it. And what we're trying to do is create that same environment now as a quality score. And the biggest question we always get is, well, why should we trust you? Why is it that your score is going to be better than the score of the original producer? And what we've done is we've created a a company that is for profit, but then we've also created organization of journalists who are Pulitzer Prize winners, ex-journalists that are knowledgeable about different kinds of vertical content. And then we've also pulled from known theories of psychology, sociology, anthropology, and we've combined all these together to create a score. We then publish the elements of the score, so transparency is really important. How did you get the score? We publish what those elements are. People can say, oh, I'm going to go look up what that means, or we'll provide you the lookup, and they say, yeah, I see a confirmation bias, or yes, that's an ad hominem attack. Yes, unknown sources not cited usually indicates that potentially somebody's not being truthful, or a quote. And a quote is often misquoted, as many people know, and we've developed a quote extractor, so if you want to see the essence of usually an article, it's really the quote. And if the quote's been distorted or truncated and abbreviated in some way, we'll highlight that. So the idea is that it's as much about bringing media literacy and critical thinking and objectivity as it is trying to root out what these subliminal suggestions are, so at least people know what they're looking at, how it's charged, and the third factor which you talked about is the political element. And 5, 6 years ago, that wasn't as heavy as it is today, but now various issues that you can bring to the forefront, you move some of the levers that we have. What does the right say? What does the left say? You almost think you're in a different country. The facts, the statistics are different, the quotes are different, the basis for the formulation of the argument's different. And I think that divisiveness is what we need to make convergence rather than continue the divergence. And so that's an important part.
Yeah, and that leads perfectly into the next question. It feels, this topic, I think we can all agree, has become so topical of late. You are constantly reading or seeing, the topic of misinformation or disinformation being, discussed. Do you feel that that's attributed to the proliferation of misinformation increasing recently, or is it just we're starting to see that covered more as a concern?
Well, I think that somewhere back around the 2016 election, people became aware of Cambridge Analytica, which is really a military operations company that scraped about 70 million Facebook accounts, began to use the data to actually try to improve particular candidates' positions or to move you on issues, and they were able to do it. And I think to the amazement of most people, people on Facebook, a free society, you publish a lot of information, and the knowledge of that personal information coupled with your cognitive biases allows companies to move you down a particular path. And that's the commercial companies. The nation states that are doing the same thing, whether it's the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians, the Venezuelans, North Koreans, they all have other objectives: create confusion, chaos, create divisiveness, prey on what they know are big issues, and also your cognitive biases. And so the combination of those have just supercharged the division in most democracies. It's not just here, it's other democracies. I was speaking in New Delhi, the same thing there, in London. I mean, everywhere there's a democracy, it's the infrastructure is fractured, the infrastructure of truth is questioned everywhere. And the more that questioning continues, the less likely that you're going to have a convergence, you're going to have continued divergence. And I think that some of the more popular shows like Netflix published The Social Dilemma. People are beginning to write about it more. There are different attempts to try to rein it in. You saw Elon Musk and what he's doing, verifying people. You see now that that becomes a big tone, but still 1 or 2% of the people are going to pay to be verified. The rest are still going to take their chances.
Yeah, and I think, I think we can say this, Social Dilemma is sort of required reading on this topic just as an initial educator, but for those who perhaps haven't seen it, can you talk about a few examples or an example of the way, AI is used to spread misinformation?
Well, I think the best example is the discussions that took place around Twitter, where Musk was saying, hey, 5 to 15% of the audience were bots, and that they were just spreading information based on virality and a bunch of other mathematical formulas. And the second part, which came out, is that 80% of the volume on Twitter was coming from 20% of the people, and a high percentage of those 20% may not even have been in the US. And so those kind of revelations are, I think, really important, and that's just one statistical case, and that's in a closed environment. We're talking about the open web, where there are 2 billion websites, where there are 4.5 billion people every day looking at these websites, looking at this content. Not a lot of them are sophisticated, right? They don't know these information operations are at play. They don't understand how you can create these content farms can create different points of view that you fall into. People aren't aware of that. And I think the awareness of that is really important, because ultimately, if we can't trust the web, then it's like a bank. You won't go there anymore if you can't trust the bank. And I think we're reaching the point where people are finding it difficult to trust the web. And what really accelerates it and magnifies it is, imagine you have a house with a cracked foundation. You can't build a skyscraper on it, and that's what ChatGPT is all about. It's a mechanism to create content at a scale that we've never seen. But if you're a young person and you don't have critical thinking, or you don't have media literacy, whatever it creates, you're going to believe. And I think we've all seen that to understand these generative AI platforms, you've got to understand the source, how it was trained, where did the depth of the content, what's the breadth of it, what's the objective of the owner. All these things are not asked. Instead, content's produced, and because the computer produced it, and it looks and feels conversational because it mimics a human's fashion of interrogating a system or asking a question, people believe it. And I think that's going to just magnify an already existing set of problems.
We had President Duque made an interesting comment that when he was speaking earlier, he said, or he likened some of the misinformation out there in the media to, junk food. And junk food has, nutritional labels on it. There should be something akin to that for kind of trash journalism. So I think it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on, the effect and threat that misinformation has had on democracy as we see it.
Well, I think that there's some perfect examples, right? We had Brexit, where a week before the vote occurred, hundreds of websites popped up all over the UK talking about immigrants coming down the Thames, the drug prices going through the roof, the currency falling apart. People voted to leave, and then 2 days later, nobody could find the websites. They just disappeared. Now, I'm sure their intelligence agencies knew where they came from, but the vote's the vote. And I think that's the thing in a democracy. If we live and die by the vote, and if people have wrong information or are misled, then they vote. And when they vote, it's, as we've all seen, it's done. And I think that's the biggest threat, is that if you can ultimately pollute the environment so much that people are misled, and they cast their vote on without full knowledge of the subject, that is the beginning of the decline of a democracy.
And do you plan, a great example, writing, it takes 2 seconds to forward an article over text, over email, and it takes even less probably to retweet, a tweet. So are you planning to also focus on social media platforms?
So, yes, so there's dozens of them out there. We're already analyzing them. Social media is different than, say, media reporting or journalistic construct. They are short message systems, and so one has to look at some higher level analysis. So what we do is we use pattern recognition and AI to take a look at the content, and we decide if it's an obituary, an op-ed, a parody, a tragedy, a comedy, a satire, and we start to break down, these combinations of concepts and words. And with tweeting, what you have to look at is, perhaps 10 before and 10 after, and then you get what we call the stance that's being taken back and forth on this. And so there are some kind of natural language processing that goes into it, but then it becomes a pattern because you can start to see the interaction of concepts and terms, and then you can cut them off when they switch to a different domain or a different subject.
Okay, perfect. Well, I could keep talking to you about this for hour. I didn't really wrap this up, but we are over time. So
yeah.
Thank you, Pat.
Sure.
And other than, I don't know if there's one last message you'd like to leave the audience with other than to go to secret.com.
No, all I would say is, critical thinking is the key. Don't just take one source as the only source because, it could be corrupted. Look at many, and you form your own opinion.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.